Schopenhauer's philosophy begins with a bleak yet profoundly realistic view of human existence. Life is fundamentally filled with suffering. In his perspective, suffering is not an anomaly or something that can be avoided. It is the essential condition of being human. The root of this suffering, according to Schopenhauer, lies in the will to live, an unconscious force that drives all living beings to perpetually desire, strive, and seek fulfillment. This ceaseless desire, whether for material possessions, love, status, or other goals, keeps us in a state of constant want. The satisfaction of one desire only leads to the birth of another, keeping us forever trapped in a cycle of unfulfilled yearning and frustration. Schopenhauer contrasts this inherent misery with the societal illusion of happiness. Society, he argues, constructs an ideal image of life where happiness is achieved through success, wealth, or the fulfillment of desires. We are taught to believe that happiness is the natural outcome of satisfying our desires, yet this ideal is a fantasy. It obscures the true nature of life, which is suffering, by presenting a superficial picture of contentment. This cultural myth suggests that once you achieve certain goals, you will find peace. However, Schopenhauer insists that such peace is fleeting, as the satisfaction of one desire simply opens the door to the next, perpetuating a never-ending cycle of yearning and discontent. In Schopenhauer's view, the happiness we are conditioned to pursue is a delusion, a fleeting escape from the true nature of existence. The more we chase after the promises of society, the perfect job, the perfect relationship, the perfect life, the more we fall into a deeper sense of emptiness and dissatisfaction. By focusing on external goals and societal ideals, we become blind to the deeper internal reality of life, which Schopenhauer urges us to confront: the acceptance that suffering is intrinsic to our existence. Thus, the human condition is not one of simple happiness, but of struggle, longing, and often pain. At the core of Schopenhauer's philosophy lies the concept of the will to live, an almost blind, unconscious force that drives all living beings. This will is not a rational, deliberate desire, but an instinctual, primal urge that propels us forward, seeking satisfaction and survival at any cost. The will is, in Schopenhauer's terms, the fundamental force behind everything. It is what drives us to seek food, to strive for love, to accumulate wealth, to survive, and even to reproduce. Everything we do is motivated by this relentless will. However, this will to live is also the root cause of human suffering. The problem lies in the fact that the will is never fully satisfied. Once one desire is fulfilled, whether it's acquiring a material possession, achieving a goal, or receiving affection, another desire inevitably arises to take its place. Schopenhauer compares human life to a never-ending cycle of desire and frustration, where the fulfillment of one want simply leads to the birth of another. This constant craving for something more keeps people locked in a state of dissatisfaction, as no matter what they achieve or acquire, the satisfaction is always short-lived. The desires that the will generates are infinite and insatiable, constantly pulling us from one goal to the next, never allowing us to rest in contentment. As soon as one desire is satisfied, it immediately reveals a new lack, and thus the cycle of striving, and suffering begins again. Schopenhauer argues that this ceaseless striving is the very essence of human existence, and it is this constant state of wanting that creates deep dissatisfaction and suffering. In essence, the will to live makes us prisoners of our own desires. We are driven by forces outside of our conscious control, forever seeking, forever desiring, yet never fully attaining lasting fulfillment. This perpetual cycle of desire and dissatisfaction is what keeps us from ever truly experiencing peace or happiness, as the fulfillment of desires only brings temporary relief, quickly replaced by new, insatiable wants. Schopenhauer views suffering as an inherent part of life, something that is unavoidable and deeply embedded in the human experience. For him, suffering is not an occasional hardship or something that can be avoided with enough comfort or success. It is the fundamental nature of existence itself. In his view, pain, lack, and death are constants that define human life. These are not external occurrences that come and go, but are intrinsic to the human condition, inevitable and persistent. Pain is the first of these fundamental aspects of suffering. Schopenhauer argues that pain, whether physical or emotional, is inescapable because our desires constantly lead to disappointment, frustration, and hurt. The satisfaction of a desire may temporarily ease this pain, but it doesn't eliminate the root cause. Each time we satisfy a want, the cycle begins, again with new desires emerging which, once unmet, bring us more pain. The root of this pain is the unceasing drive of the will to live, always pushing us forward in a quest for satisfaction, yet never allowing us to rest. Lack, or the feeling of being incomplete, is another form of suffering that Schopenhauer emphasizes. The human condition is defined by a perpetual state of lack. We constantly feel that something is missing. This lack drives us to pursue external goals, thinking that once we achieve them, we will feel whole. But no matter how much we acquire or achieve, we are always left wanting more. This endless pursuit of fulfillment creates an ongoing sense of dissatisfaction and emptiness, reinforcing the idea that we are never truly content with what we have. The fulfillment of one desire merely reveals a new one, keeping us in a state of perpetual lack and yearning. Lastly, death looms as the final, unavoidable suffering for Schopenhauer. Every human being, no matter how wealthy or successful, is ultimately subjected to the inescapable fact of mortality. Death is the ultimate cessation of the will to live, an inevitable end that renders all striving and desiring ultimately futile. No matter how much we achieve in life, it will all end in death, and the cycle of pain and lack will cease with the end of our existence. For Schopenhauer, death represents the ultimate point of suffering, a stark reminder that all of life's pursuits are fleeting and ultimately inconsequential in the face of mortality. Thus, suffering is inescapable and intertwined with the very essence of existence. Schopenhauer's vision is one where the endless cycle of desire and frustration creates a loop of pain. We are constantly striving for something we can never fully attain. Even when we achieve our desires, the sense of satisfaction is brief, and soon the cycle of wanting begins again. This creates a perpetual tension that defines human life, where satisfaction is momentary and suffering is endless. Schopenhauer's philosophy forces us to confront the reality that suffering is not something that can be avoided or eliminated. It is, in his view, a constant companion in the human experience. Schopenhauer, in his exploration of the human condition, offers some forms of escape from the ceaseless suffering that defines existence. However, these forms of escape are temporary and only offer brief moments of relief rather than permanent solutions. For Schopenhauer, true liberation from the suffering of the will is elusive, but certain avenues, such as art, philosophy, and asceticism, offer ways to temporarily transcend the painful, endless cycle of desire and frustration. Art plays a central role in Schopenhauer's philosophy as a temporary escape from suffering. Art, for Schopenhauer, is one of the few realms where an individual can momentarily break free from the oppressive demands of the will. When immersed in art, whether through music, painting, or literature, the individual experiences a shift in perception where the desires and frustrations of the self are silenced. In these moments, the individual can experience a kind of transcendence, detached from personal wants and the continuous cycle of striving. Through art, the viewer or listener can experience the world not as an object to be desired, but as a pure expression of beauty and truth. Free from the demands of the will, art allows us to temporarily escape the suffering inherent in the human condition, offering solace and peace, though it is fleeting. This form of transcendence, while relieving, is not a permanent escape, as the will remains active once the artistic experience has ended. Similarly, philosophy offers a mental and intellectual escape from suffering by allowing individuals to understand and rationalize their experiences of pain and lack. Schopenhauer's own philosophy, in particular, provides a framework through which individuals can view suffering as an inherent part of life, not as a personal flaw or tragedy, but as an inescapable part of the human condition. By contemplating the nature of suffering and desire, individuals can, for a time, distance themselves from the emotional impact of these feelings. Philosophy offers a form of cognitive relief, allowing individuals to accept suffering as part of life's paradox rather than something that should be avoided or feared. However, like art, this form of intellectual escape is temporary. Once the contemplation ends, the will resumes its grip, and the suffering inevitably returns. The third form of escape, asceticism, involves the renunciation of desires as a way to reduce suffering. For Schopenhauer, asceticism is perhaps the most direct method of temporarily breaking free from the cycle of the will. By renouncing personal desires, detaching from material pleasures, and living a life of self-discipline, individuals can reduce the impact of the will on their lives. Asceticism offers a way of quieting the constant cravings of the self, denying the desires that perpetuate suffering. Schopenhauer saw ascetics, such as monks and hermits, as individuals who attempted to free themselves from the prison of desire and attachment. While this form of escape offers more lasting relief than art or philosophy, it still cannot provide complete liberation from suffering, as human beings are bound to the will at their core. Asceticism, in Schopenhauer's view, represents a temporary surrender of desire in the pursuit of peace, but it does not offer true freedom from the inherent suffering of existence. The ideal of renouncing desires as a way to reduce suffering is a central theme in Schopenhauer's work. He argues that much of human suffering arises from the fact that the will is never fully satisfied. Desire leads to more desire, and the cycle never ends. To renounce the will, to let go of the compulsive desire for more, is seen as a path toward reducing suffering. Yet Schopenhauer acknowledges that this renunciation is not easy and requires great inner strength. Human nature is deeply rooted in desire, and breaking free from that urge is a monumental task. In his view, the ultimate relief from suffering comes only when individuals can transcend the will entirely, detaching themselves from all desires and attachments. While this is a noble goal, Schopenhauer recognizes that very few individuals can fully achieve it, and those who do live in a state of profound asceticism, often isolated from the world around them. Schopenhauer's view on happiness sharply contrasts with the conventional understanding of it as a positive state of joy, fulfillment, or bliss. For Schopenhauer, happiness is not a constant state or something we can actively pursue. It is merely the fleeting absence of suffering. In his philosophy, happiness is not about experiencing pleasure or joy. Instead, it is the temporary relief from the perpetual suffering that defines human existence. Happiness, in Schopenhauer's view, can be understood only as a momentary cessation of desire and frustration, a brief pause in the cycle of craving that constantly drives us to feel dissatisfaction. This understanding of happiness as the absence of suffering flips the usual narrative. Most people pursue happiness through the achievement of desires, whether material possessions, social success, or romantic love. However, for Schopenhauer, the pursuit of these desires is what perpetuates suffering. Even when a desire is fulfilled, the relief is only temporary because the satisfaction is soon replaced by new desires. As long as the will is active, there can be no lasting happiness. The cessation of the will, or at least a significant reduction in desire, is what brings moments of peace, but those moments are transient. Thus, happiness is not an enduring state to strive for. True freedom from suffering lies in the reduction of the will, where desires cease to dictate every aspect of your life. In this context, happiness becomes a rare and fleeting experience, more like a pause between desires than a permanent state of joy or fulfillment. The most that can be hoped for is a temporary escape from the tyranny of the will and the brief moments of peace that accompany it. This leads us to Schopenhauer's principle of sufficient reason, a fundamental concept in his philosophy that explains the nature of reality and human existence. The principle states that everything that happens has a reason, and that nothing occurs without a cause. This idea extends across all aspects of existence: the material world, our actions, and even our thoughts and desires. It means that every event, every action, and every feeling is linked to an earlier cause, and everything is determined by a chain of causes and effects. The principle of sufficient reason implies that our will to live, our desires, and our actions are not as free or independent as we believe. Rather, they are conditioned by the structure of the world and the laws of cause and effect. Our desires, Schopenhauer suggests, arise from this principle as part of a chain of events. This means that we are not free to choose our desires. They arise from the blind unconscious force of the will, which is itself shaped by external causes. Our longings for wealth, status, love, and even success are not self-created, but are instead the product of the world's causality. We may feel that we are making choices based on our inner will, but in reality, those choices are heavily influenced by external forces that precede our decisions. In Schopenhauer's view, the principle of sufficient reason ties us into a universe governed by necessity rather than freedom. There is no real autonomy in our desires, because they are all the result of causal chains that we have no control over. This leads to the realization that human suffering, which is driven by the constant desire for more, is ultimately a product of this deterministic universe, one where everything is connected by cause and effect, and free will is an illusion. The implications of this are profound. If our desires are not truly our own, but are simply the product of external and internal causes, then we are trapped in a cycle that we cannot escape. The will drives us to strive for things that we think will bring us happiness, but this drive itself is part of the larger causal chain that keeps us bound to suffering. In this sense, Schopenhauer's view of happiness as an absence of suffering becomes clearer. It is not that we achieve happiness through fulfilling desires, but that happiness is found in the cessation of the will's ceaseless striving, which is itself part of the greater web of causality. Thus, the principle of sufficient reason not only explains the nature of the world, but also deepens the sense of trapped autonomy. Our desires and actions are determined by forces beyond our conscious control, and true freedom is found not in satisfying desires, but in transcending them, in recognizing the limits of our own will and the futility of our endless striving. Schopenhauer's philosophy asks us to accept the limitations of human existence, and in doing so, we can find moments of relief from suffering and recognize that happiness, if it comes, will be fleeting, just as freedom, if it exists, is found in transcendence, not in pursuit. The paradox of existence is undeniable. We are born into a world that promises meaning, joy, and fulfillment, yet our experience is one of constant struggle and suffering. Every action, every desire, and every attempt to find happiness only leads us back to the same inescapable truth. Life, by its nature, is painful. From the moment we are born, we begin to experience loss, fear, and longing. As we grow, we continue to seek meaning. But the meaning we find is often fleeting and insubstantial, swallowed up by the ever-present cycle of want and frustration. Our pursuit of happiness, success, and fulfillment only exposes the deep, underlying truth that suffering is not an anomaly in life. It is its essence. This existential struggle to find meaning is what Schopenhauer deeply understood and reflected upon. He didn't offer us the comforting hope that everything would get better, or that there was a grand purpose behind our suffering. Instead, he called for an acceptance of life's harsh realities, the recognition that suffering is inherent to existence. For Schopenhauer, the path to peace did not lie in avoiding or denying suffering, but in acknowledging it as a part of life, and in learning to detach ourselves from the illusions that make us chase after fleeting desires in an attempt to escape it. Rather than seeking some idealized version of life where suffering is abolished or happiness is permanent, Schopenhauer argued that true peace comes from embracing the present moment as it is. The key to peace is not found in the pursuit of more possessions, more experiences, more success, but in renouncing the will to always desire. It is found in learning to accept the suffering that comes with life without allowing it to control us. True freedom is in detachment, not the detachment from the world itself, but the detachment from the constant striving and wanting that keeps us bound to a never-ending cycle of dissatisfaction. Schopenhauer's call is a sobering one, asking us to accept the inherent misery of existence, but in doing so, to find peace within it. It is a call to stop seeking happiness outside of ourselves, and to instead find peace in the absence of constant striving. The paradox is clear. We cannot escape suffering through more achievement or fulfillment, but by accepting it, we can free ourselves from the endless cycle that makes it seem like we are never enough. In the end, the struggle to find meaning in a world of suffering is not about conquering life or overcoming its challenges. It is about learning to live with it. Schopenhauer teaches us that true peace comes not from conquering the world, but from mastering the mind, from freeing ourselves from the tyranny of desire, and from accepting life as it is, with all its suffering and contradictions. Only in this acceptance can we find the peace that we seek, not because suffering will disappear, but because we will have learned to live in harmony with it.